The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Who have been the saints in your life that you want to remember today? Who has embodied Christ's transforming love for you? How have they blessed you? How have they made the world a better place? You soon will have an opportunity to light a candle to remember a particular saint in your life, either living or dead. As you light the candle, I invite you to think about how the light of Christ within you now burns a little bit brighter because of your relationship with that person. For our relationships with those who precede us in death are ongoing and sometimes richer and deeper now than they were in life. As we light our candles, we acknowledge and celebrate that we too belong to this mystical communion of saints. We too have been called to let the light of Christ's love shine through our lives. Now, being a saint doesn't negate the reality of our being sinners in need of God's mercy and forgiveness. As Lutherans, we often recall how Martin Luther stressed we are simultaneously both sinners and saints. Perhaps we'd be more accurate in calling this day All Sinners and Saints Sunday. Bill Murray played the role of Vincent in the movie St. Vincent, who accentuated that sinner side of the equation. Vincent drinks too much, gambles away money that he doesn't have at the racetrack, steals prescription medicine from a nursing home, and has a relationship with a pregnant prostitute. And when his new young neighbor, Oliver, needs someone to watch him after school while his mother works late, Vincent volunteers himself since he badly needs the money. He then takes Oliver to the bar, to the racetrack, but also to the nursing home to visit his wife who has dementia and doesn't recognize him anymore. When Oliver has a big class assignment at his Catholic school to tell the story of a modern-day saint living in their midst, he chooses Vincent. He goes out and interviews others and discovers how Vincent saved many lives in a battle in Vietnam. He also highlights how Vincent taught him positive traits like courage, sacrifice, and compassion. Vincent was a most unlikely candidate for sainthood, but Oliver saw both sides of him. He showed how Vincent sought to make the world a better place for those around him, which is what saints do. Being a saint isn't so much about being proper and nice, but rather about making the world a better place. Today we've heard Jesus' opening words from the Sermon on the Mount, those Beatitudes, which I believe when we take them as a whole have everything to do about making the world a better place. I think Jesus said these things to shock his disciples, to shock us into seeing ourselves and our world differently, less from a human perspective and more from God's perspective. And if we look closely at the text as a whole, the first 8 blessings or beatitudes are best seen as 2 stanzas of 4 lines each. And you may have noticed how the first line of the first stanza and the last line of the second stanza both end with, "For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." This ties all of those 8 verses together as one unit, emphasizing participation in God's reign, this kingdom of heaven. So being poor in spirit, mourning, or being meek aren't then states that we're to desire to be in, but rather indications of what will be no more when God's reign is fully done. The key to this very first stanza, the first 4 verses, lies in that 4th line. Blessed or honored or even happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Those who hunger and thirst for what's right and just in the world yearn for the day when those who are poor in spirit because of circumstances of their lives find no more reason to be poor in spirit. They long for a time when there are no more losses to mourn. And the meek are no longer meek because they have received back their land or some other means necessary to live meaningful, abundant lives. These Beatitudes are a vision of the reversal that God desires in our world. They are an invitation for all who hear them to let God be at work in them to bring it about. So I think a good definition of a saint is not someone who is somehow perfect or virtuous, but someone who participates in God's ways of justice, God's ways of righteousness, someone who seeks to make the world a better place. Elie Wiesel, in his 1986 Nobel Prize lecture, said, "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." Many of the people we formerly remember as saints are those who have protested injustice and sought to bring about positive changes in the world. Today, it seems like our things we can protest, the injustices around us are just so great. We have many to choose from. Well, this weekend, there were many protests around the world concerning Israel's response to the terrorist attacks last month, now resulting in the deaths, injuries, and loss of homes to many thousands of innocent people in Gaza. And protests against Russia's war on Ukraine also continue. After every horrific act of gun violence, like the one in Maine last week, more people seek stricter gun regulations. Debilitating discrimination on account of race, gender, or sexual orientation continues to need voices to help turn the tide. Action and protests seeking governments to enact measures to remediate the growing climate crisis are also ongoing. So today, as we celebrate all the saints, we're all called to be about making the world a better place. Writer Kathleen Norris says, not money or success or position or travel or love makes happiness. Service is the key. Happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for justice. They will ultimately be serving in ways that make this world a better place. Some of the saints here in worship today around us have been involved in collecting and sorting items for immigrants, and others have been sewing quilts or assisting when we host the Interfaith Action Overnight Shelter. Such serving is in itself a form of protest against the injustices of our world. Today, in Jesus' words, in those Beatitudes, we hear the call to join the saints among us and before us who strive to make this world a better place. So will we hunger and thirst for justice or look the other way? Do we hunger and thirst for righteousness, or do we assume that, well, someone else will? Will we hunger and thirst for a world transformed, or keep silent in order to not offend or disappoint, or the fear of not living up to someone else's expectations? The second stanza in these Beatitudes reveals what those who hunger and thirst for righteousness do. They are merciful, which is more than just forgiving sins. It's also about forgiving debts. It's about reversing situations in people's lives that led to their becoming downtrodden or oppressed in the first place. Those who want to make the world a better place are the pure in heart, which is another way of saying that they have integrity, or that the way they live their lives is in line with God's ways of love. If you've ever remember seeing The Wizard of Oz, you'll remember that the cowardly lion sought courage, and courage is a matter of one's heart. The pure in heart then remain courageous in seeking to bring about a more just world and society. The pure in heart, Jesus says, will see God, I think, because they've discovered God's favorite hiding place. Peacemakers also hunger and thirst for righteousness. Peacemaking in this regard is larger than just negotiating reconciliation between conflicted parties. God's idea of peace is shalom, wholeness and healing for all, both Russians and Ukrainians, Israelis and Palestinians. The poet-prophet Isaiah speaks of swords being turned into plowshares and the lion lying down with the lamb as a little child will lead them. Through baptism, we're all children of God. And so we've been called to lead in peacemaking. Some years ago, my spiritual director gave me a book on peacemaking, and it zeroed in on how the key to peace around the world over, the key to peace is in each and every individual heart. It begins here. Our finding peace within ourselves becomes the key to being peacemakers out in the world. And as we seek to live out our call as children of God and allow God to use us in bringing about a more just world, expect some pushback, even persecution. For God's ways run counter to the ways our world usually operates. Yet even in persecution, there is blessing because it reveals how God is already at work setting the world right. After those 8 verses, Jesus turns to speak further about persecution directly to his disciples. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. This is what happens when you become a follower of the one who continues to be at work to change the world. This is what happens when you follow in the footsteps of the prophets and saints who have gone before us. Expect pushback. Participating in God's mission of reconciling our world, even if we're persecuted for it, grants us an integrity of soul, which then allows us to rejoice and be glad. Today, we give thanks for all of God's saints who seek to make our world more just and right. Today, we celebrate the reality that we sinners are also saints. So on this All Sinners and Saints Sunday, we long for God's reign among us. Oh God, we yearn for your day of shalom, trusting in your Spirit's power to transform our lives and through us, this broken and hurting world. Continue to knit us all together into that one mystical body of your Son. For as we live in him and he in us, we'll surely know the indescribable, blessed joy of being numbered among the saints. Amen.